her opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Just checking, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Just wanted to make sure. So good morning. Thank you to the chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. As stated, my name is Dr. Eileen and I'm the Medical Officer of Health for the City of Toronto. My comments today will reflect the position of my organization, Toronto Public Health, and the Toronto Board of Health, and are restricted to the proposed legislation for non-medical cannabis. We support the goal of Bill C-45 to provide Canadians legal access to cannabis, and in doing so, ending the practice of criminalizing people who consume cannabis for non-medical purposes. The consequences of having a criminal record include impacts on access to employment, housing, social stigmatization, and economic status. The science on cannabis is emerging. However, we know that it is not a benign substance. Cannabis is a psychoactive substance with known harms of use. It is therefore imperative that the development of a regulatory framework is guided by public health principles to balance legal access to cannabis with reducing harms of use. Health evidence shows that smoking cannabis is linked to respiratory disorders, including bronchitis and cancer. Cannabis use impairs memory, attention span, and other cognitive functioning. Heavy cannabis use during adolescence has been linked to greater likelihood of developing dependence and impairments in memory and verbal learning. Cannabis use also impairs psychomotor abilities such as motor coordination and divided attention, relevant to a key public health concern, impaired driving. A recent study reveals that many Canadian youth consider cannabis to be less impairing than alcohol. As you may know, motor vehicle accidents are the main contributor to Canada's burden of disease and injury from cannabis. In addition to strengthening penalties for impaired driving by amending the criminal code as put forward in Bill C-45, preventing cannabis-impaired driving will require targeted public education. I recommend that the government support municipalities, provinces, and territories with local initiatives to discourage people from driving after consuming cannabis. In addition, I recommend the government invest in research for developing evidence-informed standards for drug-impaired driving and undertake research to help establish low-risk consumption limits for cannabis. The stated key objective of Bill C-45, to prevent young people from accessing cannabis, is central to adopting a public health approach to the legalization of cannabis. We must apply lessons learned from tobacco and alcohol in developing the appropriate policy framework to prevent young people from using cannabis. Evidence about tobacco advertising shows that it has an impact on youth smoking and that comprehensive advertising bans are most effective in reducing tobacco use and initiation. I welcome the requirements in Bill C-45 that maintain existing promotion and marketing rules in place for tobacco. We would also like to see these restrictions strengthened to include advertising in movies, video games, and other media which are accessible to youth. Furthermore, we know that labeling and packaging are being used for promoting tobacco and tobacco brands. Plain packaging has been identified to be a highly impactful tool for reducing tobacco use. Plain packaging regulations for cannabis should be developed similar to those being considered for tobacco, prohibiting the use of brand elements or other promotional imagery, and providing sufficient space for prominent display of health warnings and product information. I commend the government for not legalizing access to cannabis-based edible products until comprehensive regulations for its production, distribution, and sale have been developed. The experience in the United States cautions us of the challenges posed by edible cannabis products, including accidental consumption by children and overconsumption due to the delay in feeling the psychoactive effects of the drug. I would also like to draw your attention to some of the limitations of existing cannabis research. While there is growing evidence about the health impacts of cannabis, Some of the research findings are inconsistent or even contradictory, and causal relationships have not always been established. Most of the research to date has focused on frequent chronic use, and the results must be interpreted in that context. More evidence is needed about occasional and moderate use, as this comprises the majority of cannabis use. I am pleased to see that the government has announced funding for this research, and I urge the government to support strengthening the evidence base on the full range of health impacts of cannabis use, in particular for occasional and moderate consumption. Bill C-45 gives us an opportunity to promote a culture of moderation and harm reduction for cannabis that may extend to other substance use, especially amongst our young people. In closing, I would like to reaffirm that Toronto Public Health supports the stated intent of Bill C-45. I do appreciate the complexity of building a regulatory framework. And given that we're still learning about the impacts of cannabis use, the legal framework for cannabis must allow for strengthening health-promoting policies while curtailing the influence of profit-driven policies. With that, I will thank you for your attention, and I and my colleague would be very happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Well, thank you very much, Doctor, for your presentation.